Russia is ramping up its invasion of Ukraine, now in its second day. Ukraine says its forces are battling Russian troops on the edge of the capital, Kiev, and there have been reports of gunfire near the government district. Now, those air raid sirens have been sounding in Kiev and in other cities, prompting people to take shelter in metro stations. An apartment building was partially destroyed overnight. Ukraine has said it shot down 2 Russian missiles and a fighter jet over the capital. The Ukrainian government says at least 137 people have died since the invasion began, and hundreds more have been injured. Now we're going to take a look at some live pictures. This is the situation right now in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. What you're looking at, it might suggest some kind of calm there at Maidan Square. That's one of the main landmarks in the heart of the city. But many people that you don't see are actually taking cover in shelters and underground train stations in the city. And we also have unconfirmed reports of Russian soldiers in the city itself. We will, of course, be bringing you more as we get it. I'm going to be with you for the next 4 hours. We're going to have live team coverage crossing to our correspondents. But first, we are going to go to the German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier. He's about to speak and give an update on the situation.
Homes, thousands of people suffering on our very doorstep, the neighbors of our neighbors. President Putin is shedding the blood of the people that he said were his brother people just days ago. Let me appeal to President Putin now. Stop the madness of this war. Stop it now. In our hearts, with our feelings, we are thinking of those in Ukraine who are victims of this war. And for many in Russia, there will be bitter consequences of the actions taken by their president. I will say it again, we do not want to make the Russian people our enemies, but this injustice cannot remain without a clear answer. The German government is working resolutely with our partners on this in NATO and within the European Union. You can count on this. And Germany will do its bit to try to stop Putin from pursuing this path of violence within our alliance, to try to act as a deterrent. And it will cost Germany as well. This is a break, a deep break. And it hits us right at our hearts. We feel it in our families. I feel it myself. But before this attack, I said, and I will say it again now, the Russian president should not underestimate the strength of democracy. And fellow countrymen and women, let us not underestimate the strength of democracy ourselves either. It is good that the people in our countries are expressing this on the streets, in their demonstrations. Let us show the people in Ukraine that we feel their situation, show them our solidarity. The Russian president should not believe for a single second that the people in Germany and in Europe are simply going to accept this brutal violence. And let us show those in Russia who want peace that they are not alone in this desire. Let us show ourselves and our partners what is important to us now. We want peace, we want liberty, we want the rule of law, we want self-determination for all the peoples of Europe. Thank you.
So that was the German President, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, speaking there, saying Putin shedding blood and with an appeal to stop and a promise of consequences. Let's get more now from our political correspondent, Nina Haza, who's joining us from Berlin. Nina, yesterday we heard Chancellor Scholz warning Russia. Now we're hearing the president. How do you assess what the president has just said?
Well, Frank-Walter Steinmeier normally stays out of day-to-day politics, which is why it's so striking that he's giving this address that comes on day 2 of this war. But he essentially reiterated Germany's position and also his appeal to the German people, because I think at the moment we're at a point where the German population also need to understand what is going on and how they potentially will also feel the cost of this war in their own pockets. So everybody who has a high-ranking position is now seizing the opportunity to make it clear Germany cannot stay inactive. Harsh sanctions are vital because we have decided not to enter into that war ourselves, but we need to make it very clear to the Russian president, that's what President Steinmeier said, that this cannot go tolerated and that we're not going to look away. And President Steinmeier also said, don't underestimate the strength of democracy, of the democratic system.
So just to make sure we have this clear, this is not only a warning to Putin, but also perhaps a matter of getting the German population on board with tougher measures coming from Germany.
Exactly. And of course, Frank-Walter Steinmeier is an interesting personality in this German new positioning here in this Russia war, because Frank-Walter Steinmeier is one of the most experienced politicians that Germany currently has. He was Germany's foreign minister during that Crimea crisis, and he was foreign minister twice. And he comes from a party where lots of people were very much in favor of that very German position towards Russia, where you don't really focus on deterrence, you really do try and keep all windows of dialogue open. And for many people in the Social Democratic Party, I think this week has been a tremendous wake-up call. And of course, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, as the president, is not a party figure at the moment. He is supposed to be neutral, but of course he has lots of contacts. He has everybody in his books, and he can pull a couple of strings behind the scenes. So it is vital that he also makes it clear to everybody. Now, while I am maybe seen as somebody who was in favor of talking to the Russians and of keeping that dialogue going for as long as possible, I also have to make it clear where we stand now, and this is not going to be tolerated.
Nina Hase in Berlin, thanks so much for clarifying that. Now, I do want to get an update on the situation on the ground. So for the latest, I'm now joined by journalist Andrea Jeska, who is in Kiev. Andrea, we're now seeing reports that Russian troops have entered Kiev with shelling and gunfire heard. What can you tell us from where you are?
Yeah, definitely. There's shelling and gunfire heard. Nobody here in the city itself knows if the troops really have entered the city. All people get here is from the news as well, because life in the city is very, very quiet. Shops are closed. People are staying home or are standing to go into the shelters. And I've heard that people keep everything that they need. They have to rush out very close to their body or the front door.
So getting that kind of information from international broadcasters, what is going through your head as a resident of Kiev?
We've just arrived an hour ago. We've come from Donbas. We left Donbas last night very urgently because we had left from Avdiivka, which is only 4 kilometers from the front line. And people had urged us and pushed us to get out of the city before it is surrounded. And we had gone to Kharkiv and had hoped to stay there, a quiet and calm night. But then the situation deteriorated and everybody told us we should get out as well. The thing is, it's not so easy to get out of Donbas right now because the roads are blocked. The Ukrainian government has mobilized all young men between 18 and 60. They are not supposed to leave, so there are checkpoints on the streets to make sure the young men don't leave. And then we caught a train, which supposedly is one of the last trains out of the Donbas region, and came to Kiev this morning. It was a long ride. It took 14 hours or something like that. And it was full of people fleeing, having only their most necessary things. And actually, to me, it looks kind of like a situation I know from movies from 1945.
So I think it's fair to say then that the situation in Donbass is perhaps more extreme, but you do see people making these preparations and fleeing from Kiev. How would you compare the two areas at this moment?
Oh, in Kiev, there are people at the train station, hundreds and hundreds of people, which can't get out because there are no trains anymore. We saw long queues on the highways for people trying to get out. I would say it's very different because in Kiev people want to get out, whereas in Donbas you still have a lot of people who are welcoming that the Russians are coming. And then on the other hand side, Donbas was much more dangerous because the shelling was much closer as far as I can see it now. We don't know what to expect this afternoon or what's going to happen tonight. So I think both areas are not very safe anymore.
So for those who are trying to get out of the country,
a reason that people try to flee.
Andrea, for those who are trying to actually leave Ukraine, what are the pathways available to them? Where are they going, principally?
Well, most still try to figure that out. The people that we asked, they said they want to go to Poland or to Chechnya, to Czech Republic, and a lot of them said they will try to make a way into Germany. It depends on where they have their relatives or friends. You know, they don't want to start completely all over again. So they will go where they have some people that they know well and who can help them to settle and to make a new life, because most of the people that flee here expect not to return for many, many years.
And has that been possible? Have borders been open? And has it been possible to actually, for example, cross the border into Poland?
So far as we heard, it has, yes. There are people who have managed to cross into Poland. And we've heard that the border is open, and this is what the people told us too. We know the border is open. The question is just how do they get there if there are no trains, and fuel is becoming very, very expensive, and there's not much fuel anymore at the petrol stations. That is a problem. A problem is that you can't get money from the bank machines here in Kiev anymore. So, yeah, people have to go a long way in order to make it. And it's a very uncertain future that they are facing now. Even the next couple of days are very uncertain.
Andrea, I have one more question for you. The Ukrainian president himself, he's still in the country. How dangerous is this situation for him right now?
I would say it's very dangerous for him. And he said his family is threatened too. I don't think it looks too good for him. I don't know what's going to happen with him if the Russians arrest him. What will they do to him? Will they let him live? Will they kill him? Nobody knows right now. I think this is the most important part to understand, that nobody really knows what will come now in the next days. And this is not a situation people are used to, just like we are not used to it. And it's something your brain can't comprehend that quickly because it's nothing we've been brought up with. So the new reality is something that needs time to grasp and to orientate yourself where to go and what to do and what decisions to take. And I think also that is also true for the Ukrainian government, because they need some guideline what to do now.
Journalist Andrea Jeska in Kiev, thank you so much for joining us during this difficult time, and please do stay safe.
You're welcome.
So if you're just joining us, let's bring you up to speed with a recap of the latest developments on the second day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine says its forces have been battling Russian troops on the edge of the capital, Kiev. Air raid sirens have been sounding in Kiev and other cities, prompting people to take shelter in metro stations. An apartment building was partially destroyed overnight, and Ukraine said it shot down 2 Russian missiles and a fighter jet over the capital. The Ukrainian government says at least 137 people have died since the invasion began, and hundreds more have been injured. The DW's correspondent, Matthias Bollinger, joins me on the line from Kiev. Matthias, what is the situation like there now? I understand that you yourself are on your way out of Ukraine.
Well, I'm on my way out of Kiev, not out of Ukraine, but we had decided to leave the city because the situation was getting more dangerous there. For the last 2 days, we've been, for the last 2 days, there have been bombings in Kiev and airstrikes, and people have been hiding in the basements or in the metro stations, in bunkers. and we also had been. We also spent last night mostly in the bomb shelter, and when we got out, we immediately got back in the morning. We just were out and in and out of the bomb shelter. And we have news that tanks are advancing on Kiev. We don't really know how fast they're advancing or how well the Ukrainian army is doing in fighting them back. But the danger is, of course, that this city will be blocked completely soon. And that's why we are heading out. There are lots of people now trying to leave the city, long traffic jams on the ways, on the roads going west and south. We're just out of the city now and on the outskirts, and this is it's very grim now in Kiev. The city feels almost empty. You don't see anybody on the streets, or just a few people trying to maybe get some cash somewhere, or shops are all closed, so they're not even buying anything. And a few cars also on the road inside in the city center. It's eerily empty. It became almost a ghost town.
Matthias, you're talking about tanks rolling in, the threat of Kiev being blocked off entirely. I mean, this is a grim situation, as you've described it. And we've heard many people are trying to leave Kiev, such as yourself, or Ukraine entirely. But how are many others, the majority of the population of Kiev, how are they planning for this invasion? What do they have in the days ahead?
I am not sure you can plan for that, because nobody knows how it's going to happen. If street fighting in the streets breaks out and people will be fighting around the houses and the streets, then of course the situation will be very dangerous. If somehow the Ukrainian defense collapses before and the Russian tanks will just roll in, it will be very different. People have stocked up on food. People have refueled their cars if they have any, although probably many people with cars have left the city. People have been hiding in the metro stations. Kiev has this very, very deep underground train system, which is quite safe in any case. Some people have spent days there, but how can you prepare for something you don't know at all what is going to happen and how it's going to happen? How can you be safe in a city that is going to be overrun maybe by an army? It could also be that the Ukrainian army holds the Russian troops back, but of course the Russian troops outnumber the Ukrainian ones, so there is a high probability of being either overrun or completely blocked. We don't know what will happen to the electricity, to the mobile networks. All these things are very hard to foresee. So I think nobody really has an idea how to prepare, except getting as much cash out of the cash machines and having cash, stockpiling food at home, water, drinking water. That's the things you can do. The rest is not up to you when you're there.
All right, DW's Matthias Bollinger, thank you so much for your important reporting. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, the UN Refugee Agency has warned that up to 4 million people may flee their homes in Ukraine to seek shelter in other countries. Traffic jams, like the ones we've heard about, packed train and bus stations, they all suggest tens of thousands of people are already on the move. Now, in neighboring Poland, hundreds of Ukrainians spent the night sleeping in a train station just over the border from Ukraine. Some were waiting for trains that would take them on to a final destination. Others just passing en route to seek refuge with family or friends in Poland. And DW's chief political correspondent, Melinda Crane, joins me now in the studio for more analysis. Melinda, thanks so much for joining us. So with Russian troops reportedly entering Kiev, where do we stand and where do things go from here?
Well, as we heard, there are reports of fighting directly in Kiev. The country's president has said that he does, in fact, believe himself and his family to be target number one. And I think that is certainly something that the West will closely be watching to see, in fact, what does happen to him. We've also seen that the Ukrainian Defense Ministry has put out a post on social media calling on citizens in Kiev who are still there to prepare Molotov cocktails to try to hold back those Russian forces. A very troubling illustration of the degree to which the city may have trouble defending itself and be relying on self-defense, homemade self-defense on the part of citizens.
That's horrifying. If you're watching TV and you see suddenly instructions on how to make Molotov cocktails, that's not exactly encouraging.
Indeed, very troubling. And once again, something that many of us would have said can't happen in Europe. At the same time, we're hearing from the head of the EU Council, Charles Michel, that an urgent new preparation for a further round of sanctions is already in the works, perhaps linked to questions about what could happen to the Ukrainian government in the event that Russian forces now do take Kiev and are firmly in control there, because certainly Vladimir Putin has indicated that he would look for retribution against a government that he's accused, among other things, of genocide, falsely accused, of course, one must add. So a lot of developments that the West is keeping an eye on, including that flow of refugees you just mentioned. The estimate that the UN is now giving, up to 4 million, is at the higher end of the range. I had heard German authorities talk about tens of thousands up to 1 million who would enter Europe. But certainly people here in Germany are also expecting refugees to wind up here. In Berlin, here, the capital city, and Brandenburg, the surrounding area, are making plans for refugee shelters and apparently trying to clarify whether refugees would have the right to work, which indicates that they clearly expect that they could be here for some time.
Now, Germany, of course, plays a big role in all of this. And actually, Germany's former Chancellor, Angela Merkel, has now spoken out. She was in office during Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, when she insisted on keeping communication open with Moscow. But now, in a statement to the news agency DPA, she has said this. Let's take a look. This war of aggression by Russia marks a profound turning point in the history of Europe after the end of the Cold War. There is no justification whatsoever for this blatant breach of international law, and I condemn it in the strongest possible terms. Now, there has been a lot of criticism that Germany has, even to an extent, enabled this situation by allowing continued dependency on Russian gas. I mean, Melinda, what do you make of Merkel's comments just there?
Well, she's certainly not alone with those comments. She has joined a broad chorus of voices from all across the political spectrum here in Germany. We also heard the remarks by the president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, a little bit earlier, with a very similar take, saying, breach of international law, territorial integrity, and so on. Both of them illustrate the ambivalence of German policy vis-a-vis Russia really over decades. The ambivalence, on the one hand, is that Frank-Walter Steinmeier, as you mentioned, stood on the Maidan, that central square in Kiev, when there were massive demonstrations against the country's Russian-backed president in 2014, and attempted to moderate between the demonstrators and the president, and thereby prevented further bloodshed. He was later accused by Vladimir Putin of helping foment a coup, namely bringing into power a government, an independent government not backed by Russia. He did not push back on that. He did not contradict Putin. In fact, he said there's no sense in confrontation. He also, in 2016, issued a warning, not to Russia, but to NATO, saying that NATO should stop rattling its sabers. That's just one example of ambivalence. Angela Merkel Not only did she try to keep dialogue open, as you mentioned, but she also spearheaded the European effort to impose sanctions and kept her fellow EU member states online with sanctions through a whole different, through multiple stages of sanctions in response to different acts of Vladimir Putin. And at the same time, she was a firm adherent of the belief in change through commercial relations, essentially the idea that by maintaining good trade ties with the country, you can ensure a degree of moderation and stability. And this really goes back a long way in Germany, partly to the lessons that it learned in World War II. Some would say learned too well. The idea that Germany should never again resort to force, that military power is somehow taboo and off limits for Germany, and diplomacy is everything. Germany has not always acted by that credo. In fact, in the Cold War, it stepped right up with deterrence when it allowed Pershing missiles to be stationed here and thereby helped to bring Russia to its knees. But unfortunately, this idea of commercial relations being the trump has continued until now. And I think what we're seeing is a major paradigm shift for German policymakers, and it will have enormous repercussions in terms of defense expenditure and far more, including relations with China.
Potential turning point in history. Melinda Crane, thanks so much for that context. A pleasure, as always, to have you in the studio.